What's going on, boys? Today we are talking about lessons learned from important people through my life. Their types, and some little stories about them here and there. We will try to be a little more positive with this one. In no particular order, we will start with an INTJ friend of mine. The lesson I learned from him was if you are going to do something, do it like you're willing to die doing it. When he finally chooses something worth going in on, he ignores every negative potential outcome and every barrier which might prevent him from succeeding. This goes for business and for fun, and I wouldn't recommend using this all the time, but it is effective. You'll know the few times you need to 110% commit and ignore everything else. There will be negative consequences if you do this all the time, but the few times you need to, going in and sticking with something, seeing it through to the end like you're willing to die doing it, is a valuable tool worth learning. Now we'll move over to one of the close friends I had in high school, an ESTJ. I have mad respect for this man. He is becoming a doctor, earning his doctorate, and he thought he was going to be a surgeon, but now he's decided to be a teacher. And that INTJ friend I mentioned, he's a teacher. And I have respect for teachers, probably because I'm becoming a teacher. So, Teachers United has nothing to do with affecting people's lives for the better and always pursuing knowledge. It has everything to do with clan membership. But what I learned from him was begin with the fundamentals and trust the conventional until you need to adapt. This confused me for the longest time, right? Because INTPs are so stuck up our own asses, we don't realize there are reasons people do what they do. We're so arrogant we think we know everything at all times. Well, when he wanted to get into medicine, he looked for the most proven path. When I was thinking about becoming a lawyer, he recommended I follow the most conventional, proven path. And at first, I was kind of in my head being snotty about it, like, okay, why would you go for the most conventional thing first? You know, going through like Common Core or something like that, or the most conventional method of doing something, is so limiting. It's not adapted to someone as unique as I am. So why would you do that? And his answer was, because it works, you fucking idiot. If you are going to invest your time and money in something, why wouldn't you want to invest in the thing that's been proven to work over and over again? And he was completely right about that. He was so right, in fact, there are few instances in my life I will do an immediate heel turn and change my position on something. And that happens only with people I respect and trust when they make such a good point I can't argue. And that was a heel turn for me. Start with the fundamentals. If you can polish yourself on what's been proven to work, one, you have a foundation you can build from, you won't trip, and when you need to adapt, you are familiar enough with the system, you can adapt yourself with that system rather than going completely off on some errant, out of nowhere thing that nobody can help you with. You need people's help if you want to succeed. And they can't help you if they don't know what you're doing. They don't even have a frame of reference to begin trying to help you. But he's really cool, and I'd like to get him on the channel again at some point. The positive side of ESTJs, or just positive ESTJs in general, aren't shown often, but he's a great example of a cool one I trust, one I respect. The next lesson I learned comes from what I think is an INTP professor in my first year of university. And that lesson is know your skills and your prowess with them, but never get cocky. He was one of my favorite professors because he knew how to teach subtly. I wrote a paper for him, and he told me it was the best undergrad paper he'd read in 40 years of teaching. And he called me to his office while he was working so we could discuss it. And when I got there, he said, "So I gave you high praise on that paper because you deserve to be complimented. But don't let it get to your head because success will ruin you." And I said, okay, that's cool, fine, I appreciate the praise, but don't worry, I'm not arrogant. I am the humblest person you've ever met. Skimmerlit is so goddamned humble you wouldn't believe. And, of course, it affected my next paper. I went way overboard trying to be intellectual and artistic, but poignant, all those adjectives. And nothing grammatically was wrong with the paper. Nothing substantially was wrong with the paper. But everything was about the style. And he didn't give me much feedback on that paper, but he took 1 point off. I had scored perfectly in his class before that paper and after that paper. But he took 1 single point off, and he didn't say what that 1 point was for. But I knew it was because I let my own arrogance get to my head, and I drank my own Kool-Aid. And when you do that, you become vulnerable in ways you don't notice, and you make yourself a target. And that was his way of telling me, don't do that. And it was a smart way of doing it too, because he didn't need to say anything. He just did that one little thing, and that was enough to send the whole message. But he was a great professor. I still speak with him once every few years just to see how he's doing. And I keep that one essay framed because I'm proud of it, but just because he was a cool professor. I was really nasty in that essay, and he was praising me for it, and it was it was funny. One of the lines was, "Life is a joke, college is the punchline," and he underlined it and drew a little line away and said "brutal" with 3 exclamation marks. But that was the kind of dumb shit I was, thinking I was being meaningful, but it's just funny. I really like him. Good professors are hard to find. When you find them, don't let them go. Learn everything you can from them. Moving on to another professor example, an ENTP 7W8. And he has a reputation for being arrogant, having a huge ego, but with him, nobody can really say anything about it because he's earned it. You don't get to say that about people often. And once you get to know him, seems like you're always saying that with NTPs. Once you get to know them, they're fine. But he's very nice inside, and he puts on this hard act to try to whip people into shape. What I learned from him, there was a book signing at our university, and the professor wanted to speak with the author. And I went there with my ENTJ friend at the time because we kind of had nothing better to do, but I also wanted to get the professor's opinion on some things. And so everyone's filing out, and I go see the professor, ask him what he thinks about the author, about the presentation. He said the presentation sucked and the author is full of shit. He expected better, which was a good start. And then immediately I went into... So, I had introduced him to MBTI, and he was super dismissive of it at first, until he reached a point he told me, I keep thinking about it, I can't get it out of my head. If you have one of those cognitive functions packets you've been handing out to people, like a creepy cult member, I would love to have one. And that's when he took the test and found out about all that stuff. But super cool. I asked him, you're an ENTP, you've been around for a long time, you've seen a lot. He's traveled the world, he lived in Spain for a long time. He literally wrote the book about Hemingway in Spain. And I asked him, what relationship advice do you have? I want to know. It would be useful. If I can... our functions are similar enough. If I can learn what you've learned, now I can improve my life exponentially. And I can make sure what you've learned doesn't die. And he told me, I wish I had learned vulnerability earlier. I was always riding my high horse, thinking I was smarter than everyone, could be like a maverick and be outside the system. But it took me my entire life to learn vulnerability. If you want to build and maintain connections with people, you need to lower your guns. If you won't lower your guns, nobody else will either. And if you keep your guns up, everyone keeps their guns up, they are more likely to shoot you than you will ever be to shoot them. Lower your guns, be vulnerable, hard, I know, but take the hit. It's worth it. And that is a good skill. I wish I would implement it a little bit more. But it's hard. Worth learning, though. But he is a great man. Always on his NEFE shit. Always talking to everyone. Always trying to prod people to figure out what they know. Who's shit, who isn't. One of the best Hemingway quotes I learned from him was, every good author needs a built-in, shock-proof shit detector. And Hemingway was an ESTP. And he's funny, not Hemingway, I mean Hemingway is funny, but the professor, he's always chasing that SI dragon, always hunting that dragon's hoard of knowledge. And we were talking about inferior functions one time, and I explained to him the function development over stages of your life, as in most people will develop their inferior function in their 40s. And for him, part of developing SI would probably be or involve developing stability and consistency. And he said, stability? I said, yeah, stability. He said, I guess I didn't get the memo. And he had. It's just funny, because when you hear about his early life, you can see that inferior SI like mad. He would just go and do wild things, not think about the consequences until afterward. He would pick fights with people, sometimes for no reason. He conducted most of his university courses in the beginning of his career entirely without a syllabus for himself or his students. He explained, well, after the first few years, I realized it doesn't hurt having a list so everyone knows where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to know and when. Because I don't need one. But if I don't provide one for my students, they won't know what they're supposed to do, and they won't do it because they won't know what they're supposed to do, which eluded me for years. So from him, if you want to love someone and to be loved on any level, be vulnerable, lower your weapon. You'll take a beating, but it will be worth it in the end. Next example, another professor. I don't know her type for certain, but I am almost sure she is an INTP 9. If not an INTP 9, then an INFP 5 or an INFJ 5. Her lesson was, or her lessons, there were two. One, your 20s suck and you won't make real friends until you're 30. And two, part of growing up is learning to play the game and game the system. So while Mr. ENTP is the best modern shaman at my university, in the real sense, he talks about Jung constantly, talks about Mithraism constantly, talks about all that weird religious stuff. This professor, we're going to call her an INTP and stick with that. Miss INTP is the best professor, capital P professor, in the university, at least for English. Nobody knows her shit the way this professor does. Her courses are some of the most rigorous, but she is also the most forgiving if you're trying. One of her key lines is, "The purpose of university is thought." With a capital T. It's not the value, necessarily, of what you're thinking, or getting a good grade. Only that you are thinking and are learning to think. Not what to think, but how to think. Regarding the lessons for this video, her statement on your 20s suck and you won't make real friends until you're 30, she said her 20s sucked so bad. Her teens sucked so bad. She hated everyone. Nobody gave her a reason ever to like them. And the few friends she did have would always end up stabbing her in the back or leaving her in the dust. And she said she wouldn't go back to her teens or 20s for any amount of money, even if she could go back knowing everything she knows now. That's how much her 20s sucked. But she said, once you hit 30, things start changing. People get a little bit more consistent, worthwhile. By the time you're 30, many people will have worked out their problems. You'll have worked out many of your own problems, and you're better prepared to try to be a human being, and a good one. So if you're having trouble in your teens or 20s, I don't think it'll get better. That, or at least that much better. Always getting better a little bit, but I don't think it'll get that much better when we're 30. But this is an accomplished, successful, sharp, intelligent person saying it does get better when you turn 30. So, we'll see. Stick with it. Now, regarding the second lesson, I had finished the most difficult university course I'd taken at the time. And it was one of her courses. And the next semester, I joined up with one of the easiest courses run by her. And my life was kind of going into the downward spiral during that semester, and that's when COVID started kicking off. And I asked her about my paper for the difficult course, and she said, well, your paper was better than everyone else's by a large margin. And it caught me off guard because I felt really insecure about that paper. I wrote about something I didn't care about. I wrote in a way that was not me. And I thought that would show and affect my grade for the negative. And she said, no, part of what you're doing in university is learning how to read people and give them what they're looking for. It's not about the knowledge. University, it is in part about the knowledge, but most of what you're learning in university, especially in English, is high-level people reading. Otherwise, how would you sell what you know? How would you make yourself useful to anyone just knowing about literature? Keep yourself, maintain yourself, develop yourself But when you are trying to succeed, leave yourself out of it. Leave only your skills in and be as assertive and cutthroat as possible with them. That includes knowing how to read people and giving them what they want. You won't survive otherwise. And that sounds like a cynical, nasty thing to say, maybe, but it's true, and at that time, I really hadn't considered that. And now that I've tried to integrate it a bit better, it works. So I can verify the truth behind that one. And more on the personal note, that professor reminded me a whole lot of my mother, who is an ISTP, and the professor ended up being sort of a surrogate mother while I was out there. And she was very cool, very kind. She helped me through a hard time. And always grateful for her, for Mr. ENTP, and for Mr. INTP, the other one. Now, we will get into some grad student examples. There are 2 INFPs I've known who had anything worth saying. People I still have respect for, hold in high regard. And interestingly, both their lessons were based in insecurity and fear and dealing with that insecurity and fear. But they had different approaches. Similar but different. This is why these 2 fellas are fascinating. I'll start with the first one because I met him first and he isn't around anymore. So with him, his lesson was, if something scares you about the world or about yourself, lunge at it. If you don't, if you cower, you will stagnate and you'll die. That might sound weird, especially considering the wrong stereotypes about INFPs, but in my experience, most INFPs, at least INFP males, act that way. If something bothers them, really scares them, shakes them to their core, they will stagnate for a little while until they realize they can't, and then they will lunge at the problem with everything. For him, he hated his introversion. He hated the fact that he had good reason to be as introverted as he was. Bad things happened. In fact, I did an interview with him, and one of the few people in this world I've met who was willing to go 0 to 100 on a microphone knowing other people would probably hear it. And he gave a tell-all about his life, and massive respect to him for being willing to do that. I don't know if I wouldn't be able to do that. And I ended up not posting the interview because it was so personal. I didn't want anyone, it's probably unlikely, but I didn't want anyone even to have the chance of stumbling across it, but also because that was a personal moment for us. And I wish I had been more developed at the time, so I would have pursued a friendship with him instead of shutting it down immediately after. But he had reasons to be introverted. There were nasty things about his life. But he said, I hated myself because all I would do is sit in my room, eat ice cream, drink beer, and watch anime. And I hated it. But I didn't know what to do about it, so I threw myself out there. This extroversion you think you see, it's all an act. I put it on because if I don't, I'll stagnate again, and I can't let myself stagnate. And he seemed super extroverted, right? He seemed like an ENFP. He was always goofing around, always saying stuff, putting his opinion out there, especially when nobody asked, pissing everyone off, writing great poetry. At the time, I didn't know what to make of him. He was kind of annoying because I didn't really know how to process INFPs at the time, or ENFPs. But looking back on it, that was some king shit he was doing. And even though he was clumsy, he was doing it. He was fighting his problem one day at a time, and he was fighting it brutally. Just giving his own introversion and self-hatred a beatdown. But one of the things I admired most about him was his absolute honesty. I haven't met people that honest. I haven't met people of any type, but especially INFPs. INFPs can be so fucking frustrating with their I want to be mysterious thing. I haven't met people who would be that forthcoming with a stranger probably the second time you meet them, especially when that stranger isn't really sharing anything about themselves. I don't share things about myself most of the time, especially with people. I keep the spotlight on them. And when someone turns the spotlight on me, I will try to share, but I won't go that deep that quickly. I like it when other people do because I like knowing things, but I'm not that forthcoming. I respect that, like, knightly, like, berserker knightly honesty. It's dangerous to be that honest, and you shouldn't be. But when someone else is doing it, the most respect for them. Now, moving on to the next INFP, this guy is fascinating but intimidating. I never know what he's thinking, and the vibe I get from him is plotting. But the things he's plotting are usually pleasant surprises for people he cares about. So I'm still uncomfortable. I have no reason to be, but I like him. He deals with the same sort of insecurity this other INFP seems to. Fear of other people, insecurity about the world, about being overwhelmed by things, about feeling unequipped to deal with things. But his lesson was, if something scares you, organize. We were talking about this one day, and I asked him why he is so gregarious socially. And he said, because it's all an act. Socializing terrifies me. I am scared of what people think of me or what they might do to me. But one day, I realized I literally cannot be any more scared than I am right now. So I'm not gonna get more scared if I put myself out there and try to meet people and try to make connections. So he did. And always with INFPs, that inferior TE, once it comes online, once they realize they can fight, once they realize they can organize, they can take concrete action against the things scaring them, they do. Now, first INFP, he had a lot of his own inner demons, and he went at them with an axe. This INFP has a lot of external fears and, like, financial fears. I don't know all of his fears, because he's one of the more mysterious INFPs, one of the FE aware INFPs, not using FE, but aware of FE and the consequences of fucking up FE. So he almost never says everything that's on his mind. But he has gotten so good at organizing tight-knit groups of people to take action against things he dislikes, not on the FE level of, I will just be really nice to these people and control them socially to do my bidding, but I offer the best product you're going to find in terms of group organization or group goals. So if you're with me, we'll all be in this together. We can all go after the same problem together. And I respect that. I respect both the INFP's approaches to fear, that constant, agonizing terror. Go at it with an axe, and build up people around you so you have a cadre of soldiers to help you. And I want to say this too while we're here. Second INFP reminds me of Saul Alinsky. I don't know why people demonize Rules for Radicals, the book, so much. If you read it and don't listen to what everyone tells you to think about it, all it is a book for intuitive perceivers to effect change in whatever system they're in. People say it's like this hyper-liberal, evil book that needs to be burned because everybody likes burning books. But really, it's just, if you're discontent with a system, here are some ways, some anecdotes, some philosophies that can help you alter that system. It's worth a read. Now we will move on to an older friend of mine. He was an INFJ. We had a blow up and we don't talk anymore. But he was a socially genius sort of dude. His lesson was choose your words carefully and never make yourself a target. If you are an INTP who wants to learn the social game, meet some INFJs. They know what they're doing, and they have probably been itching to share their knowledge with people for a long time now. Choosing your words carefully. Something I learned from him was, in conversations, the first few things out of someone's mouth, or words you hear repeated in conversations, doesn't matter what's said, but the things that are discussed, the things that are brought up, those are that person's insecurities. Those are their weaknesses. If you want to take someone down, or you want to get inside someone's head, you pay attention to the things they bring up first or most often. Because to the person, everyone's internal monologue will be fixated on the things they are worried about. So when they speak, they will want to speak about the things they're worried about. And it won't seem like it's coming out of nowhere to them because they are always immersed in their internal monologue. To other people, the things people say will come out of nowhere. And you need to pay attention to that, because it's not just, oh, that's weird that this person said this, I wonder where that came from. It was, this person has been thinking about this for a long time, or this thing bothers this person a whole lot, which is why they are fixating on it, or why they are trying to puff themselves up to seem not afraid of it. He played fighting games incessantly, and he would always talk about making better reads than anyone else, always knowing what the person was going to do before they did it. And succeeding in life, or beating people, involves making reads about their character. Those reads come from the things they bring up, the ways they discuss them, especially if they do it often, or with odd or erratic emotional energy. That is choose your words carefully, but it also ties into don't make yourself a target. Every single thing you say is an opportunity for a perceptive individual to get a read on you if they know what they're doing. So if you want to talk about something with someone you don't know, talk about something unrelated to you for the most part. This is why having a side skill is useful, or reading up on something irrelevant that you just for some reason know a lot about. Because if you give them that and not what you are really thinking about, not what you are really interested in, it's like throwing up flares. They might be able to tell that you aren't talking about something you're invested in, but they won't be able to read your mind. INFJs can't actually read your mind. They can read what you give them. So if you don't give them something that will turn you into a target, you're harder to target. And this is weird, right? He would hang out in my Twitch streams when I would stream often, and he would make reads on people who would come in and out of my Twitch chat. Like, oh yeah, this dude's super insecure about that. Or, yeah, she got bullied a lot when she was a kid. Or, this guy's someone you shouldn't trust, be really careful of him. And one of the reasons I really liked this friend, and I am frustrated we had that blow up, is he is one of the few people I trusted, one of the few people who was willing to go to bat for me at risk of himself in the social mood. And it bugs me because I never got to tell him that I was willing to take a bullet for him. Two people in the world, well, one person now, my mother and just my mother. He was the second one. And it stinks that we had that blow up because, one, what he did felt like a betrayal to me, and when I lashed out back, it felt like a betrayal to him, and he door slammed me before we could talk it out. So it's frustrating. I wasn't super happy with the way our friendship was, but I was comfortable with it, as in, things could be better, but they could be a lot worse, and I'm okay with things the way they are right now. I'm so okay with it, in fact, I would be willing to go to bat for him on things, the way he sometimes seemed willing to go to bat on things for me. So, summarizing this lesson, pay attention to what people give you because they've been thinking about it a long time. And pay attention to what you're giving other people because you've been thinking about it for a long time. That's how people know where to hit each other in their weak spots. And if you make a target of yourself by coming across as too weak too often, this includes boasting about how great you are, people will knock you down just for the fun of it, because they don't like you. Either you're making yourself an easy target because you are revealing all your insecurities, and so many of them, right? Or you are revealing your insecurities by playing yourself up as a big, tough person, at which point someone will want to knock you down just for the gratification of putting someone in their place and teaching them they're worthless. And on the self-preservation note as well, if someone is saying weird, threatening things to you, especially a TE type, take it seriously. They are insane. And it's not just a joke. It's not just something said in passing. That's something that will come up again and something they are thinking about, something they are willing to do. Do not trust TE types. If you see something bad, hear something bad, especially more than once, nip it in the bud early. Now, on a different note, I would like to say or share some good lessons I've learned from ENFPs and ENTJs, but I haven't really learned crystallized lessons from them. In ENFP and ENTJ friendships and relationships, my development has been more adapting to what they're doing and becoming a better version of myself, or creating new methods for myself, not picking up what they're doing. So if you don't see yourself on here, that's why. Love you guys to pieces. Don't worry about it. Not to give myself away too much, of course, right? Behind the scenes note, I have a suspicion a few people from the past are stalking me, because I know for a fact one of them is, because I have analytics. It's creepy, it's uncomfortable. Haven't really told anyone about it. It makes me really uncomfortable. Well, actually, I take that back. Not about the fear thing, but about the ENTJ's lessons thing. My aunt is an ENTJ, and she's an ENTJ1. ENTJ1s are wild, but they have valuable skills. What interests me most about ENTJ1s is it's like they sacrifice some of their TE or their conquer the world ambition for emotional fulfillment and emotional exploration. My aunt, everyone on my father's side of the family had a hard life. My grandfather was not the best father. In fact, he wasn't even really that good of a father. And my aunt had a hard time, and she came to an impasse a lot earlier than people probably should come to an impasse. And her lesson for solving problems that seem insurmountable or inaccessible was turn those problems into logistics by writing them out. Make a list. Then, piece by piece, knock those problems off the list. So, when my aunt was young, she was having a lot of issues, especially on the FI end, like self-problem issues, or why isn't life like this? Is it something wrong with me? Issues. And she solved them by writing out everything that wanted or made her want not to even try to live anymore. And she said once she had written them all out, she felt stupid because those things were things she could just do probably in 2 days if she put her mind to it. And that's exactly what she did. She knocked off the most difficult things on that list because once she wrote them out, she could see them. And she could keep track of them. And that created a habit in her life of whenever she would run into a problem, she would sit down, she would take a note card, write out the problem on that note card or in a notebook or something, and carry it with her everywhere. She had a key loop of organized note cards of problems, like emotional problems or life problems she was working through. And each day she would try to, in some way, tackle one of those problems. If not all at once, then at least part of that problem. And like she was on the grind of self-development rather than on the grind of world domination, which is why I think she's a pretty happy, stable person, which is difficult to say of any NJ, right? Any problem she runs into, including emotional problems, because she is always dealing with emotional problems, she can handle by turning those problems into logistics. And they will crush her. They will turn her into an emotional wreck the way emotional problems turn ENTJs into emotional wrecks. The fetaled up on the floor, crying in the shower level most ENTJs don't want you to see. But she handles them with a system. She systematizes her emotions and solves them that way, which you might not think would be fulfilling, but it works for her. In fact, every month she has a cry day. So one weekend, usually in the beginning of the month, she will sit down and all day, all she will do is work on arts and crafts while watching sad movies so she can get all that emotional sadness and negativity out of her all at once. And when she's done with that day, she feels refreshed. She feels prepared to combat the rest of the month. And she likes arts and crafts too. I think that sort of runs in our family. But she said doing crafts lets her focus on something she has control over. And that relaxes her, especially when she's done with the craft and she can give it to someone and see them happy. That's fulfilling for her. She likes organizing family events, and she goes all out with them, like a little bit too much most of the time. But that fulfills her. Turning emotional problems into logistics, not running from them. She handles them in her own way, but she handles them. One of the biggest problems ENTJs run into is running from their emotional problems without acknowledging that's what they're doing, which is why ENTJs will rise in success through their 20s and 30s, and then they'll want to kill themselves in their 40s and 50s, because they never train themselves to handle their emotions and the effects of those emotions until it's too late. They've lost everything. So if you're having problems, especially emotional problems, turn them into logistics. Turn them into a list, then confront that list. Now we'll move into a smaller one, but a fun one. Fun guy I like talking about. A guy I used to work with. He's an ISTP. He he was nice enough to indulge my MBTI shit because we got along, and he was funny. We didn't talk about it often, but I liked him a lot. So his lesson was never work too hard on something or for someone you don't believe in. This guy worked for the printing press my mother worked at, and I worked at, and our boss was a piece of shit. He was so shitty, in fact, my mother would come home crying nearly every day. She would find quiet places in the job site and she would cry. She went on medication. This guy was fucking evil. And when I was starting out, I was packing some things and I went to cut some tape or something, or maybe some cardboard with my knife, and I have a nice knife. I'm very fond of it. And he stopped me while I was working and gave me this ugly beat up knife from the shop, and he said, "That's a nice knife. You don't want to dull that thing on people who don't give a shit about you." And I hadn't thought about it that way, because at that time I was still in my... Well, I think people are fundamentally good. I think in every awful person there's a little bit of good, and all it takes is some kindness and some hard work to get that goodness out of them. And this dude, I don't even remember his name, but he was this little skinny dude, smoked all the time, who was the engineer for the press, or one of them. And he just knew people were shitty and didn't want me wasting myself on them. He would sneak out and smoke all the time. He would fuck around. He would just talk to people sometimes or do nothing. And you would think he was lazy, but in reality he was a volunteer firefighter on the side. He always looked out for people who were worth it, whatever that meant to him. And it's taken me a long time to realize, yeah, you shouldn't kill yourself for people who don't care about you. Not just because that would be a waste of your life, worrying about what your boss who doesn't care about you thinks, but also because if you waste yourself for someone who isn't worth it, you are deprived, and it sounds selfish, I know, but it deprives other people who might need you of your best self. And I think that's what he was on about. But the fun little anecdote, I couldn't get this line trimmer working one time because I was doing dog shit manual labor for that place. And I was getting furious with it because I'd been out there for like 30 minutes trying to get the damn thing working. And he comes over and he watches me try to get it working for about 30 seconds, and then he steps in, takes the engine apart, pulls out what I think is a spark plug, pulls out a lighter, holds the fire up to it. The spark plug like goes up in smoke for a second, and then goes back to normal. He cleans it off, puts it back in, hands the line trimmer to me and says, "Alright, now try it." So I pull it once or twice and it comes online like nothing was wrong. And somehow he was able just to know what was wrong with it almost immediately, take it apart, fix the problem, and do it in a flashy way. He was smirking while he was doing it, and he was just a wizard with technology. Super cool dude. I hope he's doing well. Don't waste your life, your resources, your energy on people who don't give a shit about you, who aren't worth your time. Give your life, your energy to people who do matter. And now, for the last lesson of the evening, is one I learned from my mother, an ISTP. Use your verbal blow-ups or teardowns strategically. If you didn't know, ISTPs and INTPs are the kings and queens of the verbal blow-up or teardown. I never realized how vicious we came across to people, because that's when someone pushes us that far, that's the way we are. And when you are an INTP or an ISTP, these things seem like cold justice to us. Usually, we see the receipts. This is what went wrong, or this is what has been happening. These person's words aren't vicious; they are correct. But in reality, INTPs and ISTPs' words hurt people. I never knew how much our words would hurt people, especially when we are pushed past that point and go for people's throats verbally. In my mind, words shouldn't have that much power over people, but they do. And it shouldn't be a problem, even if they do have that much power, because for me, those sorts of blow-ups are reserved for social relationships, never professional relationships. My mother is warlike in her career when people are shitty. It'll take a while, but once someone pushes her past that point, she will go the fuck off on people. It's scary how insane she'll get once she's furious. It's funny, but it's unsettling to people most of the time. And one thing I learned from her, you can use verbal blow-ups and teardowns at work. One, when they're justified. Two, when you have options. Which is why getting a good degree or getting some good credentials is important, so you have those options. So you can go off on people when you need to. And what interests me about her blow-ups and teardowns is I don't think she's ever been fired. She knows when and where to deploy some verbal bludgeoning to make the changes she wants at work. And if she can't make them, she'll find another job. She'll find a way out. She'll make a way out. There's been maybe one instance in my life I have witnessed her unable to do that, and that was at that shitty job I worked. Because the boss, one, headhunted her and offered her like $5,000 more than she was making. Then once he got a hold of her, he somehow blacklisted her, and nobody else was willing to hire her. Just nasty, and she wasn't in a situation she could leave. But in every other instance since then, and even before then, knowing when and where to blow up on people is useful. You don't want to do it in a bad spot, because if you do, bad things will happen. But you can stand up for yourself, and you can stand up for yourself aggressively when you know when and how to do it. I never thought that was an option. I still haven't tried it, but learning from her, I have learned to stand up for myself more professionally, and I'm grateful for that. And on that note, there are many reasons I love my mother, but I want to share some of the funnier, neater ones. So, firstly, she, and I think ISTPs and INTPs, share the same sort of reptilian but erratic views on humanity. So one moment it will be, everyone's great. I get along with everyone. People make the world wonderful. Everything's grand. I love everyone. And then the next minute it'll be, everyone could die tomorrow, myself included, and I wouldn't care. Nothing of value would be lost. And I appreciate that worldview, because when someone with that worldview has lived long enough and succeeded, there are useful lessons to learn, but fun things they will teach you or help you learn. For instance, I was raised never ever to lie. Even now, I don't like lying. Like outright lying. I'm bad at it. I don't like it. I don't like people who do it. My father is of the mind only bad people have things to hide. So I try to strive for absolute honesty most of the time. But it became a problem because I couldn't lie. And I was talking to my mom about this one day, and she said, well, if you want to survive around people, you need to learn to lie, because people are stupid, they'll believe what you tell them, and if you try to be yourself around anyone, they'll try to kill you. So if this is something that's bothering you, something you want to work on, every time you and I talk, just lie to me. Try to slip in one lie, and I will tell you once we're finished talking whether or not you tricked me. I learned it's okay to lie to survive. Other people do it all the time. But I have still never met anyone that real about it. Most people will just lie and say you shouldn't lie, or say they never lie, but they just lie their asses off. My mother understood the value of lying when necessary and was willing to help me develop that skill. I never really did, because lying to my mother felt wrong, and ISTPs are natural lie detectors in the first place, and goddamn are they competitive, so I could never get a lie past her, so I stopped. But knowing someone in your corner condones your less than superficially nice strategies is helpful. Feels good. Makes you feel like you're not an insane villain for needing to do things you need to do to get by. Another thing, we were talking about our funerals one time, and like the logistics of what a funeral is, what it's supposed to mean, and how they should be conducted. And she was telling me, well, if someone wants this sort of funeral, I'll do whatever they need. But if I ever die, just leave me. If you're feeling generous, put me in a cardboard box and bury me. And I was thinking, well, not to sound like a snake, but if we were in an apocalypse sort of situation, that's exactly what I would do. Thank you for being cool about it. Why are you cool about it? People don't normally talk that way. And she was like, well, I wouldn't want to hinder you in a bad situation, and it doesn't really matter to me what happens after I die because I'm dead. What does it matter? And I thought that was one, that's another instance of that's pretty real, and thank you for being on that reptilian, seeming to other people reptilian, but not so reptilian to us because it just makes sense, wavelength. But that's exactly what Diogenes said. That's one of his core lessons, right? It was something about, I don't care if wolves eat me after I'm dead because I'm dead, so what does it matter? There are trends in archetypes. While MBTI is useful for what it is right now, I think there's a reason, or I think it is attached to archetypes, and there are reasons certain types and their archetypes are so relevant still. And the last thing that's pretty cool about my mother, which I appreciate, is her stance of you do whatever you need to do to survive. If you have good reasons, sound reasons, and you commit to them, I won't hold your decision against you. And I appreciate that in particular because I am always concerned about what other people think about me. I'm especially concerned about what my family thinks of me. I have always wanted my parents' approval. So when I'm given the the nod, the go-ahead of, I will trust your judgment as long as you don't make bad decisions, I feel a lot more freedom. I feel better. I feel more independent. I don't need to worry so much about approval, because as long as I have thought through what I'm doing and can justify it, at least my mother won't hold it against me. And that's about it for little lessons and anecdotes regarding people in my life and their types. So I hope you maybe picked something up you can use, because if I knew what I knew now when I was younger, I would be a more effective person. Not that I would ever want to go back anyway, because fuck your teens and 20s, but hopefully you got a little bit of value out of it. And I wanted to be a little more personal and positive for a video. But that about rippity wraps this one up. I hope you enjoyed watching, because I certainly enjoyed making it. This one isn't as structured or as valuable as I think it should be, as I think videos should be, and it's a bit longer. Well, a lot longer. I don't like how long my videos have been recently, but I hope you enjoyed, because I like talking about personal stuff sometimes, but the struggle of, is this something people will get something out of, is a little challenging. Like if you enjoyed, because it helps me out a lot. Subscribe if you haven't, because we do this shit sometimes. And comment your thoughts, because I love hearing from you. What are some life lessons, crystallized life lessons, you have learned from people you value in your life? What are some little stories attached to them? I am always interested in picking up life badges that we can flash at problems when we need to. So, love to hear some of them. But thanks again for watching. Are you ready? Really, we have a lot of fun on this channel. So much fun. In fact, we are running out of a space in my room. Or, not space, things. My room is empty. It's so empty, in fact, you could fill up this room with fun. And have a nice, comfy, fun room. And live in it. That's how much fun we have on this channel, and I look forward to doing this with you guys again in the future.